Alrighty, we are live. Hi, Internet. It's our countdown to new video live stream, and it's a good one. So, a bunch of stuff that I can talk about this week. Done some really cool personal stuff. Started trying some intermittent fasting. Found out I've lost more weight than I thought in the last few months, and I have a new video coming out in 1 hour. And it's going to be about Edith Windsor. So for anyone who doesn't know, Edith Windsor is the gay rights activist who recently passed away just back in September. And she is basically responsible for the Supreme Court decision that destroyed the Defense of Marriage Act in 2013. And so she's going to be the subject of my of the video that comes out at 2. So those are the things that I could talk about. But of course, you know, everybody who comes to these streams regularly, of course, you can always talk about anything. And I end up going on interesting tangents and chatting with you guys in the hour leading up to video release time. So if you guys want me to ramble off about something, then put it in the chat. First, I'm going to start by talking to. All right. I'm gonna need to apologize in advance for my pronunciation. Svingvej af Kungsorn. I'm good at this. I don't even know. I think that is from either Scandinavia or Eastern Europe, but like I couldn't even guess. No, I'm not even gonna try. Okay, so thank you for saying that you like my work, though. What can I say? I am an Anglophone, not. So, you know, that's just how it is. That's just how it is. How are you guys doing? Anyways, so if I were a vampire, that's always how a good question starts. Oh, so I'll tell you guys a little bit about my next video that's coming out. So my next video on Edith Windsor. She was a gay rights activist. So to give you the short rundown on the video, she basically got into gay rights activism after the Stonewall riots, and then had a partner / spouse who had a lot of medical issues, and when she died, she got dinged for a bunch of money on estate taxes because the Defense of Marriage Act basically barred her from claiming all the things that marriage entails, even though, you know, she got married in a place where marriage was legal, i.e. out there in Toronto, and the federal government wasn't under obligation to acknowledge any marriages, even in states that had legalized it. And that is that's you know, led to the Supreme Court decision that basically killed the DOMA. Yeah. So if you were a vampire, where would you be? I assume indoors and away from sunlight. I'm not exactly sure where you're going with that. Say hello to Hellfox Fox. We got Priest Magic 76 coming from Washington, D.C. Hello. I'm surprised to find out that there is non-Europeans watching this because of the time that it comes out. Which country would I be a vampire in? I'm going to go say somewhere where there's not a lot of strong legal people around. I feel like it'd be easier to be a vampire where it was easy to find people to take away and bite in the middle of the night. Oh, when it's about my video about vampires, well, I guess Romanian vampires, because Romanian vampires at least have some sort of agency. The other ones are just corpses that chew or something that cause like kind of havoc. So like I'd rather be somebody who can actually get up and do shit. Cats or dogs? I would say that I'm okay. Complicated question, because I would say that as a person and as for the kinds of things I like to do and the kind of pet I like to have, what I like to get out of the human pet relationship, I would be a dog person. But because of the context I grew up in, I had to become a cat person because I basically grew up in a house that refused to get dogs and only got cats. And so when I was growing up, I always had a cat, and I never got a dog until I was like 20 years old. And even then, the dog was only around for about 2 years before I had to move away to go to university. So, here, let me get this audio thing over here. I think that might have been a problem that I was having. So, I was raised in a house that only had cats. Nobody wanted a dog except for me. We got one eventually, but then I had to move away. And now I live in a house, or I live in a tiny apartment with 2 cats because my wife, when we moved in together, already had a cat. We got another cat to like kind of give her some company. And my wife doesn't really like animals all that much, so there's no like adding a dog to that mixture, and we're already living in a tiny condo that doesn't allow for technically not doesn't even allow for 2 pets. So at the moment, the cats we are at maximum petitude for the moment until one of the cats passes away. Then I am totally gunning to get a dog. Okay. Living in Washington, D.C., I had no choice, but I love history. If you love history, then Washington, D.C. is a great place to live. Yeah, Washington, D.C. is amazing. I last time I went there, I think, was in 2014, and I loved it, and I would go again. I would live in the Smithsonian if I could. I went there a few times. I was a little disappointed in 2014 because of all the redesigns. They've like changed a lot of stuff, but there's some really great museums in Washington, D.C. One of my favorite museums that honestly is like empty almost all the time if you're living in DC is the Museum of I think it's like the African American Civil War Museum, and it's off of the main mall, but not very far off the main mall. And it is a small museum of basically like Black Civil War experiences. So it's got Black soldiers' uniforms. It's got some stuff about like, slave revolts and all sorts of stuff. And it's a really cool museum. When I went there, I don't know if it was the time we went there or if it was the museum itself, but there was nobody else in the museum. And it was quite an amazing experience. And I feel like I was rather disappointed that nobody had ever participated in that. All right, so let's see. We got some new people. We got Guka here. I'd like to know what you mean by favorite historical revisionism. If you can elaborate what you mean by that, then I'll go for it. For Priest Magic, for more stuff on DC, there's also the Museum of the American Indian, which is actually curated by Indigenous Americans, and I found that to be a really cool museum too. I really wanted to like the Museum of American History, but unfortunately, the Museum of American History has become so 2 things. They've kind of bought into this new thing in public history where museums are more focused on narrative and have less in the way of like artifacts. And so you find that in the Museum of American History, there's a lot of like stuff. There's a lot of like drawings and billboards and like maybe like models and recreations and things like that, but there's not a lot in the way of like this is like an actual thing from the history, and that disappoints me a little bit. And also I can't help but have some issues with like the technology exhibit that they have that is sponsored by like a coal company and all that kind of stuff, and it's really annoying. By the way, do you speak to strangers in Canada like in the US? Do I speak to strangers? I mean, I don't exact. I mean, in the U.S., I don't know what you mean. That's a weird question, but if you can elaborate, I will answer your question. Oh, favorite example of an event that was interpreted as one way but was wrong. I'm gonna have to think about that one for a bit, but I really do like that very recently the Civil War is finally getting rid of this like lost cause narrative, and that we can finally grow up and talk about what historians have been saying for years, which is like, Civil War was about slavery, and it was, and the South lost, and it was not some like lost cause narrative. It was exactly what it seemed. As far as anything else goes, I think that the Civil War being revisioned, if you will, is pretty important when it comes to things like justice for facing the darker parts of American history in this period. I do like that there's also, for a similar reason, been a turnaround in our history of Canadian Indigenous relations, especially when it comes to the residential schools and how we ignored those for so long. And then we had our Truth and Reconciliation Commission that really brought everything to light. And that is a pretty fun thing. Do you just talk? I don't talk to random people on the bus. I'm a person who, like, headphones and podcast type of person when I'm on like public transit or when I'm out on the street. Sometimes people try to talk to me, but I'm not super, I guess, like, maybe I can be socially awkward when someone just springs up a conversation all of a sudden. But once I get into it, I guess, I wouldn't be against talking to strangers, but I think that when you live in a city like Toronto, there's a different code of ethics. I think that when you're in a big city, just talking to random people can be interpreted as a threat and scary. And so it's not recommended, especially talking to people talking to women or anything. It's just not a good idea. Let's see. What is my favorite movie? Jeez. I'm trying to think of it. Like, I don't rank. I know that this is something that my wife always gets really frustrated with me about, but I don't rank things all that much. I think that I really like, if there's like a movie that I would always play and I would always be happy to watch, it'd probably be Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country. I think I could watch that one a million times. That's not The Undiscovered Country. Sorry. The Voyage Home, the fourth one, the nuclear vessels one. That one's always a fun movie. As far as like good, I don't think it's like a great movie. Like, I don't think it's like an Oscar-worthy movie. When it comes to things like that, I think of things like Citizen Kane, which I feel like feels super pretentious because I did genuinely enjoy that movie. But when it comes to like my favorite films, I'm not a really good connoisseur of movies. I should be, but I'm not. And so I end up watching all the same crap that everyone else watches and instantly forgetting about it. So, like, whatever Disney's, Marvel pushing out any given day. I will say WALL-E. WALL-E is actually, I think, when it comes to like one of my like favoriteest of favorite movies, WALL-E's pretty high up there, the Pixar movie with the robots, because I like a lot of what it says in the movie, and I like how much they're able to do with no dialogue. And so those kinds of things make me really happy. Hello from the Isle of Man. Hi. You're the one who has you have that person. You're the one that has that person who, what's it called? You have that flag that's like 3 legs. And also you have David Icke. Well, if there's someone from the Isle of Man coming to watch, I'm very happy. I have never been there. I doubt I'll ever go there, but it's cool to see someone come from someplace like that. Yeah, in Toronto, everybody has headphones. No one's talking to anybody. It's not just a like European thing. It's like a city thing. What do you think of the sexual harassment stories that are coming out? So everyone's so that's a big story these days, the whole sexual harassment scandal after scandal after scandal. And I think that it's making a lot of people face a lot of difficult things that they thought they knew about people. And it's going to be hard because there's a lot of people who make stuff that we enjoy that are going to turn out to be kind of garbage people. But it's important. This kind of shit that they were doing is not, it's not right. It's not good. People shouldn't treat women like they're friggin' prizes or just force themselves on women like they're some sort of object or animal. Like, no, bad. And I think that it's really productive that people are finally like unleashing the floodgates and all of this like crap that's been underneath the rug in, you know, in Hollywood history is starting to just flood out, and it's starting to go into politics with Al Franken today, and you had George H.W. Bush earlier. It's good news. I think the reason we're panicking is very much like when divorce was first, when they first started to normalize the divorce process and it was easy to get them. A whole bunch of people were getting divorced, and people were thinking like, oh, like this is like the end of marriage as we know it. Everything is ruined. But it turns out that it was kind of like a flood from all of the dysfunctional and abusive marriages that people couldn't get out of before. And now we're free from. And I think that it's going to be crazy for a little while, but in the end, we're going to have a much healthier Hollywood as a result. So Toronto ETIC, sweet spelling is what I looked after. Talking to people expands your horizons, may broaden your friends' acquisition space. Maybe. I don't know anybody in Toronto. So like, yeah. So let's see here. What's your favorite empire, conqueror, or kingdom? Like the Parisian and Mongols. As far as like interesting things go, one of the ones that I'm starting to study right now is the Sassanid Empire. They're going to feature prominently in not this video, but next week's video. And the Sassanids are quite interesting. They were like the last pre-Islamic empire in Iran. And even though they were like Zoroastrian, they had a very inclusive society, a very multi-ethnic, very multi-religious society. And their kind of predecessors, the Achaemenids, were also really interesting. And I think that those two empires, despite being these really cool metropolitan, cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious empires, like way before that was common, them not having that sort of like that existing, and then history kind of portraying them as villains because of their relationship with the Greeks, is one, unfair, and two, kind of ruins what I think was a really cool time period for people, especially in that age, which was very rare. Captain Picard asking what my favorite car chase is. Honestly, I'm bad for that. Like when I watch a car chase, that's like instantly when I start like thinking about like, you know, what I'm going to pick up at the grocery store, because I don't know. I don't find action in movies unless it's like really well done very interesting. And I honestly, I've never owned a car. I don't drive. I don't care about cars in like even the slightest. And so like I'm loving the day when like we're going to have automated cars that we don't have to worry about them. So like car chases don't interest me even in the slightest. CK2 is a good game. All right. Cletus 223 asks, are you familiar with the Real Crusades History Channel? I am not. I haven't heard of them. Do a Zoroastrian Let's Play in CK2. That would be fun. The thing about Zoroastrian CK2 playthroughs is that you end up having to really dilute things because you keep having to marry your siblings to each other, and you end up getting super messed up in like the long term. Your favorite movie is Zootropolis. Is that Zootopia in like a different language? Because Zootopia was a good movie. It's kind of for kids, but it's like talking about racism for kids, which is a good movie, and it was fun to watch. But I don't know if Zootropolis is the same thing. With historical, I have thought about this actually. So my Scandinavian friend, as I'm going to just say because I butchered his name already, was talking about how, or is wondering about doing like a Crusader Kings 2 playthrough with like historians commentary, which I think would be a really cool idea. I think I could do that for all of the games in the Paradox series, but I don't know, one, where I would do it, what channel it would be on. Probably I could do it as a stream on the YouTube channel, but like I would have to make VODs for something like that, and I don't know where I'd put them. Probably on Historian IRL. But yeah, that is something that I have thought about, and I just wonder if I can like, if I'm well researched enough, because when it comes to CK2, there's a lot of like little things that I won't have any commentary on that people will get mad because CK or the Paradox fan base is full of like devout Polish history nerds, and I'm bad at that kind of stuff. All right, so Hell Fox, what's your favorite stereotype? My favorite stereotype. I'm not super sure how to answer that question. I don't like stereotypes. I guess like maybe those like kind of friendly jabby stereotypes about like Scottish people and French Canadians, about how they're like as a French Canadian, like, you know, the whole stereotype that we like to drink beer and have fun, and Scottish people have a whole reputation of being angry and yet crazy and silly and all sorts of fun stuff. I think that Scottish stereotype, I imagine that if you dug a little bit deeper, it's probably very, very damaging, and there's probably a lot of like negative sides to the Scottish stereotype. But like the fun Scottish stereotype, I like a lot actually. If that's, did the Zoroastrians inbreed for the same reasons as Egyptians? For that, I would probably have to find out why. I think that the Egyptians did it because they thought they had divine lineage they had to protect. Zoroastrians don't do that. Zoroastrians just believe in consanguineous marriages, especially for the ruling class. It could be for the same reason. I actually couldn't speak there, but the Zoroastrians aren't exactly a polytheistic religion, so it might not be for the same reason. English drinking tea, just like the Irish, the drinking beer, not tea. Yep. Yeah, I mean, the Scottish, there's like two Scottish stereotypes, and the one of like the like heavy drinking, heavy fun times, music, kilts, haggis, you know, that stereotype I like. The other one I did not know until I was a bit older. The one of like the penny pinching, like hyper fiscally repressed Scotsman who like won't spend a nickel to save his life type of thing. That's probably a little more damaging, but I only heard about that one recently. I don't even know what the Welsh stereotype is because except that they have kind of a goofy accent. That's about all I know about the Welsh accents. Except that one time in CK2, I did make I did start as a Welsh ruler and took over the British Empire. Oh, hi, Phoebe. My cat's here. And I did start as a Welsh leader, and I did make like something called like Elfed or something like that, which was like the British Empire in Welsh. And so the Welsh were like the British Empire, which I thought was pretty fun. So, but it was really funny to see like all of the goofy names that everything had because it had Welsh names. But I was disappointed because I always thought that like Welsh names for things would always have at least 14 or 15 letters in them. So I think that when I did that Welsh playthrough, I started with the old gods start date. Like I think it was before the Charlemagne expansion came out, and so it was the old god start. Like I don't know, Scottish people, this whole Scottish stereotype. Like I don't know, is there anybody who really hates Scottish people these days? Like maybe in the UK and like super English people who are like I don't know English supremacists who are mad that the Scots keep wanting to have independence because they're mad that the British or the English rule everything. But what can I say? I would, if I was Scottish, I would be very happy to be Scottish because it'd be a fun stereotype to live up to. And I mean, I'm French Canadian, but like, here's where things get complicated when it comes to French Canadians. Like, I'm a French Canadian background, and English people, so Anglophone world, sees ethnicity through your bloodline. So, you know, I have French Canadian heritage, therefore French Canadian. So English people think that I'm French. Go to Quebec, and French speaking people identify ethnicity through what language you speak. And I don't, I mean, I speak French, but I don't speak French very well. At least not enough to like, I know enough to have a conversation, but not enough to like get a job where I would be speaking French in the office or anything like that. And so many French people think of me as English because I'm an English speaking person. And that's not great. Basically, I'm an outcast on both sides. Didn't I think there was actually an expansion for Crusader Kings that came out today, like just a few hours ago. I think it's like the Jade Dragon expansion or something like that, and it's going to be about like the influence of the Chinese Empire. I don't know too much about what they're doing with that, but I haven't played CK2 very much in the last like year or so. Um, CK2 very quickly, very promptly got replaced with Stellaris as soon as Stellaris came out. And so my Paradox like game of choice is Stellaris. Hmm. Are there a lot of Latino stereotypes in Canada? Not really. There's not there's not a ton of Latinx people in Canada. Um, those that are also primarily live in French areas because it's easier to learn French if you're Spanish speaking. So there's not a ton of people here, and if there is, we don't. I mean, there are, but there's not a ton of stereotypes about them. Uh, and historically accurate, please. So Art Explains. Hey man, it's Xander, the Art Explains guy. And I heard that he's an Iowan who just recently went over to Vancouver for a conference because he's a grad student like me. And he just like it was his first trip to Canada. And he was like asking, like, oh, I'm gonna be going to Canada. Are we gonna like, you know? And it was like, you're like on the other side of the country by like because he's like in BC, which is like it's like just north of like Washington State or Oregon, whichever one is the most north. And I'm like fairly close to Buffalo, New York. Yeah, so if you guys haven't gone to Art Explains, you should, because his channel is very fun and he doesn't make enough videos. So maybe if you got a flood of new subscribers, you'd actually like put some stuff out and we would get more Art Explains. That's the hope. I also hear he has a tendon or something named after him, which is pretty cool. Do 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 do. Yeah, you guys can't see it, but there's like a cat right here, and she's just lying down. And I don't want to pick her up because she seems very comfy, but just know that there's a kitty right here. And let me think. What kind of art do you explain? So Xander's channel is kind of like it's like a mix of like history, psychology, and like he doesn't really have I don't think he has like a favorite topic. It's just like weird stuff. I think weird is like the thing that joins all of his video topics together, but it's not like, despite what the channel says, it's not about art, although it should be, or it should be rebranded or something. Because yeah, Art Explains makes you think that it's going to be like explaining like works of art, which I would actually love to see Xander try to do, to actually like dissect like a painting or something. Let's see. We got Cogito here saying that we need more Art Explains videos. That's good. So it's another European. I think Cogito is like from Ireland. The feeling when your country is so irrelevant it has no stereotypes. What do you mean that your country is so irrelevant it has no stereotypes? What's like? Are you like? Are you Hungarian? If you're Hungarian, um, I can like we can think of some Hungarian stereotypes. Um, there's like the whole thing that like Hungarians make like really interesting food in that they like make gigantic piles of fried things, specifically like sausages and stuff. Um, I know that like there's a bunch of Hungarians who lived in the city that I used to live in, and there was a great Hungarian restaurant where it was run by this like super like dirty mouth old lady who like would just say like openly raunchy and sexual things at her restaurant to just like random customers. Um, and it was like a super fancy Hungarian restaurant too. And paprika and all of the wonder, like Hungary is like the place where German and Eastern European stuff kind of mix in like a cool way, especially when it comes to food. So you get like all the schnitzels, but you also get like the like pierogies and sorry, I'm like fasting these days, and so all I can think about is food. Um, that's very bad for me. Um, Hungary is also well known. Fun fact, Hungary is like the suicide capital of Europe. And like Budapest is like the suicide capital of like the world. Um, Hungary had that one song that came out in the 1920s that everyone claimed was like causing people to commit suicide. That's a thing about Hungary I know. Oh, is that DD? Yes. This is my wife's computer in the background here, and my wife is joining in my D&D campaign. And she had like 75% finished making her character, and then realized when she had to go to like, an hour before she had to go to the office this morning that we were going to be like, she was going to be getting off work. We were going to go get dinner, and then we were going to go to this guy's house to play D&D, and her character was like not finished. And so she had a PDF of the player's manual like ready to go to like figure out what does a paladin do. And so we were working that stuff out in like a really impromptu fashion, like really fast. So it can be like, oh, you have to do this, 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 and this. So we were, I guess she just left her computer at that status where she was getting her character ready to go for tonight. Oh, and also Hungary is they consider themselves the descendants of the Huns, and they're like, they have like Tengri horde ancestors. So they're like related to like migrating horse people. I think it's also something like one of the oldest countries to exist. Like it's one of like the oldest persistently existing countries in history. And for some reason, like a lot of your Eastern European countries these days, they've decided that like Nazism is like a thing that is cool. And so this whole, I think it was like somebody like Only Bro or somebody from like a previous stream took the lid off of whatever this national Bolshevik thing is. And it turns out that Hungary, like a lot of countries, have like been like, well, we're not communist anymore, and we really don't want to go back to that. And we're not really into capitalism either, because capitalism also sucks. So I guess we're just going to become Nazis now. And it's like, please no. Please no. So you have like these like anti-immigrant, super hyper like racist right-wing parties showing up all over countries like Poland and Hungary and a few other countries as well. And it's like, oh, no, thank you. Please. Please. All right. So how much stuff have I missed out? Ireland. Ireland. Cool thing about Ireland, since Kogito is Irish and he's here right now, there's like this interesting thing that happens in Canada where, so during the potato famine, a thing that Irish people love to talk about, a whole bunch of Irish immigrants came to Canada just like they did to the United States. But because the Irish were Catholic, they decided to put them with the other Catholics, which in Canada meant with the French. And so there's like these parts of Quebec that are very, very Irish. And there's like this population of like French speaking Irish people who live in Canada. But also you have the same, also like people who say they're Irish because like their great 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 grandfather came over here and like that kind of thing. When like, I claim French Canadian ancestry, even though that French is my first language, but like my grandmother is a Francophone. Like I can at least talk to somebody who is alive, who French was their first language. But yeah, there's like a weird crossover of Irish and French in Quebec. Maybe Kogito can say something more to this, but the whole Black Irish thing. So the whole Black Irish thing, I've always been told, is kind of like not a thing. Like there's like some theories that like the Black Irish people are Spaniards who like went ashore in Ireland and grew up, but what it actually is like a word that people made up when they like were surprised that not all Irish people are like pasty faced and red haired with freckles. And when they find out that there's actually like brown haired people who are Irish who are not like ghost face, that they were like, well, these people can't possibly be Irish, which now that I think about it, kind of goes back to like the like 18th century like British anti-Irish racism, where they were like, oh, the Irish are also another race that we don't like because they're too pale and they're too redheaded. And I've heard that's a thing, but I don't think it's true. I think it like the whole like Spanish thing is like an urban myth. But the fact that like they had to find some way to explain that not all Irish are gingers was I don't know. I thought it was really strange, but I think that that's where like the Black Irish thing comes from. Then like, yeah, it's not because like my dad is Irish-ish, and he is like he's got like black hair like me, and he's got brown eyes and he's got darker skin, and it's because and it's just that, you know, it's almost as if our concepts about race are stupid because they are. The entire concept of race is dumb, and it's a colonial like categories system that we impose on a bunch of people for no reason, and doesn't realize that there's tons of diversity in skin colors and pigments of people's eyes and hair and such that is all over the place, all over most of the world. And making these categories have no actual biological purpose to them whatsoever. They don't make any sense. They only make sense as social categories because we made them. And so now we have very real problems made on social categories that don't exist in any biologically meaningful sense. So if you were like hanging on to like racism and saying like, oh, like race is like a real thing. No, it's not. It's like, it is, there is no biological category. Like there is nothing biologically different between two people of different races. And if you look down at like the genetic level, you might find that you are more closely related to somebody who might look like they're black genetically than they will phylogically, because there's not a lot of genetic diversity in the human species. We're actually like, this is like a weird thing because like humans in general are much less genetically diverse than your typical animal species. So like human beings are way more similar to each other than like, say, cats and dogs. That's why you can have like, you know, the Chihuahua and the Great Dane. That's a huge difference. That'd be like having like a 2 foot and 10 foot tall human. And it's just like, it's not a thing with us. At least there's never been a 10 foot tall human, but like very different cases. But there's a whole but humans are very similar to each other, and they think it's because about 20,000 years ago there was a volcanic eruption that blotted out the sun for about a year and wiped out most of humanity. So like there was like an apocalyptic event called the Toba catastrophe that happened about 20,000 years ago that resulted in there being very few humans after that. And so the humans that did survive and did like bounce back are much more genetically related than most other species. There's also the Irish equals Carthaginians thing that was also popular in colonial Britain, which is hilarious. Yeah, like I think that that's another thing that a lot of people at least people in the Americas don't appreciate, is that the English colonized Ireland. Like it was not like a conquest or something like that. Like there was like colonies and colonization, and it was like an ongoing process for quite a while. Like the Irish have had just as much, like, they didn't have the Irish colonization is actually a very good symbol of what the Americas might have been like if it wasn't for the resistances to diseases that caused almost like 90% or something of the indigenous population to disappear. And Ireland is a country, an island that did not have, or that did have the same genetic resistances as the rest of the English. When the English colonized them, their population didn't disappear in the same numbers, and so they were able to be like heavily resistant and eventually got their own independence. And I imagine in my alternate history scenario where colonization happens and there's no disease factor, that that would be probably the case and what the Americas would look like today, I hope. So let's see. All right. Yeah. Okay. So, how long would humans have had to have been confined to a distinct geographical region and result in genetically different categories? A true race difference. You do see that in some cases, like Xander, like the Neanderthals and humans, and there's another one. There's like the kind of, I think they're like actually calling them Hobbit people who lived in like something like Papua New Guinea or something like that, and it takes hundreds of thousands of years. Like that's been shown. And like the Homo sapiens who eventually like, wiped out all of our other species. Like I think like the idea that like there's biologically different races, like the colonial race idea is silly, but there were different human races not too long ago. And that was basically like, in the like 5 digits of years ago, not in like the, hundreds of years ago. And so, yeah, I mean, it takes like hundreds of thousands of years for that kind of thing to happen. I mean, it's yeah. So let's see what we got here. The Turks and Caicos thing is kind of true. It's like this. So there's this like theory that's been, or not theory. There's been like this plan for Canada to annex the Turks and Caicos Islands in the Caribbean forever because the British were trying to. So the British gave us Newfoundland when they were like basically pawning off their American territories to us, and the Turks and Caicos was floated as a colony to give Canada to take care of, and the Turks and Caicos are like this has been bounced back and forth by different governments over the years, but I think the issue comes down to the fact that even though the Turks and Caicos people apparently vote for it, the Canadians don't really want to do it because it would be a huge cost for us to, implement all of the things that Canada would need. Like adding a new province would be a whole thing, and so it's never really taken off. But there's been some attempts, like Nova Scotia tried to annex it into Nova Scotia at one point, and that failed. But I don't think people have talked about it seriously now since like the 80s. So. But it was something that was on our radar for quite a while. And on Hungarians being related to Koreans, technically, maybe like in a little bit. So like Hungarians have like a kind of Turkic language background, and there is a a linguistic similarity between the Korean language and the Turkish language. And the Turkish language is kind of related to Hungarian. And so there's like multiple levels of connections, but basically it's all related to like people living in Central Asia. What's my favorite country? Costa Rica. I've never been there, but it sounds like it's a pretty nice place. I guess the Toba thing apparently happened much longer than I thought. Speak more about alt history America. Will we get races in the future? Probably not, because we're now too globalized. You would need, like, if you wanted to create different races, like if you wanted humans to breed to the point where there were actually different species, you would need something like space travel to be a factor. Like you would need people living somewhere far away that basically they're there and there's no way for humans to travel back and forth anymore. So you'd have to have like one of those like multi-century starships that goes off to like Alpha Centauri or something. And there's no way to get there that doesn't take like hundreds of years. Then they might genetically diverge far enough away to like have actual speciation. Uh, and yeah, if you also look back at like the time of antiquity, like Roman Empire, ancient Egypt, there were all sorts of different skin colors and races living together. What we would call today races living together. That that wouldn't work to, like work today. Like there were definitely a lot of black people living in ancient Egypt. Uh, because the ancient Egyptian society went all the way down to a place called Nubia, which is basically in today's Somalia. And at one point in Egyptian history, there actually were probably some black pharaohs, because there was this period where the Nubians basically ran the like royal bloodline, and so they were probably black for at least a chunk of really, really old Egyptian history. Newfoundland was not its own country for a bit. Newfoundland was a British colony until after World War II, and then the British said that they were going to pawn off Newfoundland. Either it was just not going to be allowed to be a colony anymore, and the Newfoundlanders had to vote on whether to become independent or join Canada, and joining Canada won, but not by a bunch. The other thing, actually, if you want to go with like sci-fi examples, is that we might actually speciate ourselves. I actually was thinking of writing a science fiction novel about this at one point a couple of years ago. The idea just popped in, and I never actually ran with it. But the idea that if we started genetically engineering ourselves, like those like designer baby ideas, we would start changing our genetic code so that we would have different attributes and different things. But but there would also be capitalism and brands and things like that. And I had an idea of a science fiction story where the different brands of genetic profiles that we get, like, packages of genetic alterations that you could give to your kids over time, has resulted in the fact that like the Coke and Pepsi of genetic engineers, like, and genetic engineering corporations, can't interbreed anymore. And so you have a society where like everybody's genetic destiny, like an entire group of humanity, where their entire genetic destiny is basically up to like a private corporation. And there are people like the Coke and Pepsi people can't interbreed, and so they over time become like, they genetically drifted enough that like they wouldn't be able to, they'd have harder times understanding each other, because maybe one was like interested in promoting creativity and one was like interested in promoting like rote memorization. And so like they'd be like a part of humanity that is like super, super smart, and one that's like super, super creative. And like eventually they just keep adding on to that, to the point where like the humans can't even, these two groups can't even like communicate with each other anymore. The thing about whenever I think of creative ideas is that I have like this dissertation to write, and also I tend to think of ideas and settings and not characters and plot, which is kind of what you need to write like a real novel. So I never actually did it. Um, and also, I feel like when I'm like, I feel like I'm also describing probably like Gattaca or something, like some science fiction thing I haven't seen. I haven't like, if I wanted to write this novel properly, I would have to like read all of like the genetic engineering science fiction to see what's been done already, and see like the movies and think of things like that. But it was something that came to mind for a little bit. It was something I like wrote on a napkin once when I was sitting in a bar, basically. Hey Phoebe. She's like from here to here. She's just like asleep and just like takes up my entire thing. So we have 5 minutes left before the big video comes out. There's 22 of you guys here. So what do you want to? What do you guys want me to ramble about next? Gonna get the link to the video ready to go because I want you guys all to watch it the second it comes out and give me lots of velocity. Favorite historical nickname? Okay, so I can answer a few of these things. I don't know. I can't think of a historical nickname off the top of my head. Though Charles the Bald is a pretty good one, I do have to say. Isn't there like one that's called like something the unfit or something like that? I don't know. Honestly, I'm not good with the European history, and they're the ones who really like the nicknames. I also like Shaka Zulu, which in like his original language was like a thing that was supposed to mean like it was like a derogatory nickname calling him like shithead or something, but then he ended up becoming like a giant like conqueror, and everyone was like freaking out. The big video, for anybody who's coming in late, it's about Edith Windsor, the gay rights activist who defeated the Defense of Marriage Act. That's the video that's coming out today. Second favorite historical nickname. Athelred the Unready. That was it. Yeah, that's the one I was thinking about. Talk about Stellaris. All right, Stellaris. Stellaris is a very good game. It is the best science fiction game I think I've ever seen made by a game company. I like that its species are very open-ended and can play into all sorts of different tropes, and that it has really cool colonization and diplomacy features. I really like it. It's like probably one of my favorite video games of all time. And they're currently changing some stuff about the game to make it way better for like their big 2.0 patch, the like cherry update or something. And they're changing the way that like travel and colonization and expansion work, and it's going to make it probably the best game ever as soon as it comes out. And I'm super excited about that. As for my favorite historical period, my favorite historical period is actually, I always say this, the turn of the century, in both senses, because my research has to do with like the early 2000s. And so that period, the war on terror, the chief like Bush era is a big thing for me, but also like the 1900s, the 00s, where you had a lot of big political upheaval and all sorts of really interesting stuff going on. Like, you had the rise of the IWW in America and all sorts of really cool social movements that could have. There was so much more up for grabs in the 1900s than there is today, and I feel like we missed out a little bit because of that. All right, let me like lightning round all this stuff real quick. What do you think about hive minds? In Stellaris, they're fun. They're kind of boring in the sense there's no diplomacy, but it's kind of interesting in its own way. They're more fun to have as antagonists in the game than they are to actually play, because most of the features get turned off, and so it's kind of boring in that sense. Our language is Finno-Ugric. However, there's not much of a connection between Hungarian and... Okay, I missed a few conversations in the mix. All right, lightning round. So, what's my favorite console? I haven't owned a console since my PS2, so I've been a PC gamer pretty much my whole life. Yeah, PC, if PC counts as a console. If not, don't tell my wife this, but there's going to be a Nintendo Switch in the house come Christmas, and so maybe that'll be more fun. Who knows? I haven't tried it yet. Oh God, I'm running out of time. All right, I'll just wrap up. Thank you guys so much for coming to the stream. I'm going to be doing this before all my video releases, so if you didn't get a question answered, I can answer it at a different time. Just keep watching, step back, and and you'll find something eventually. There's going to be a subscriber appreciation day this weekend, so keep tabs for that. And I'm going to put the link in the chat. And watch that video, enjoy it, like, share, subscribe, and I hope you guys all have an amazing Thursday. Bye!